Songs of the Return, Volume 2, The First Tale of the Darumzu. Our great Lord Ysgramor, the harbinger of us all, did then send forth his two beloved sons, with him the only other survivors of the brutalities of Saarthal, to seek out the bravest warriors of the land and mount the great return. Ingol and Ilgar they were called, and they were known among Atmora as fine warriors with bright eyes and dawning futures. Ingol, the elder, was the brave strategist, bringing his learnings to bear on the battlefield that his enemies would be defeated before they even know the battle had begun. Ilgar, the younger, was possessed of an unwavering spirit that drove his singular prowess to overwhelming feats in war. Together, the mind and the arm, they were capable of sowing a destruction most thorough and glorious to any foe who stood before them. Before they parted ways to gather their crews, the two clasped arms and necks in the old fashion and laughed at the heavens for their stories to come. Young Ilgar then took to the massive shipyards of Ylkrufik at the southern point and commissioned 2 ships for himself and his brother. He would command the Darumzu, and his brother the Harak, thus carrying the names of the 2 favored stars of their heavens. The shipmakers' spirits had been suitably filled by Ysgramor's tales of the savage elves, and they set about to birth ships that befit their noble homeland. Arrangements having been made, Ilgar set forth to the academies of honored soldiers, seeking out his most trusted friends and advisors to join him on the venture of the return. By now the stories of the new land to the south were spreading before him, and the mere emergence of his presence was enough to cause the finest warriors to lay down their present undertakings and follow him. So was he able to call to his side the great shield sisters, Froa and Grosta, who thought and spoke as one, and they brought with them the wise war teacher Adrimk, who first taught them to dance among the blades. She, in turn, mustered all the students at her command, whose names were not yet made, but some of whom would one day be known. Jorrvaskr, who throws his shield, Urlach, who breathes fire, Ramth the Greater, Merkilian Ramth, and the far-sighted Yuk, who would see the first of many dawns. On the day of final passage, when the many-oared fleet would last see the distant green summers of Atmora, the brothers were near in their father's wake as the freshly joined 500 would eagerly press onwards towards Tamriel. Ilgar could see his well-minded brother smiling from afar across the waves, and they shouted war cries to each other, longing for the soon day when their assembled crews would draw the treacherous elf blood into the ground which they would now claim for their own rights. But Kind's ministrations are not to be taken lightly, and though her blessings gave wind to drive those brave sailors to their destiny, so too did her mighty tears fall to drive them apart. When the storm of separation first arose, young Ilgar had no fear, for his crew was strong and able, and their ship drove true through the forest of swells as though pulled by the rope of fate. When the skies cleared, and Ilgar glimpsed again with new eyes the land of his past and future home, he knew his brother's vessel was not within his horizon. The Darumzu, arriving late, drew forth onto the sands, and Ilgar rushed to his father to seek word of his brother. The great Ysgramor, harbinger of us all, wept for his lost son, and sought comfort in the arms of his only remaining joy. The crew of the Harak became the first deaths among the 500, and Ilgar so enraged with love for his brother that his crew would soon be counted as first among the many noble and honored names in the companions. Songs of the Return, Volume 7, The Tale of the Jorrvaskr. When at last the rightful claim of Saarthal had been retaken, driving the murderous elves back to their lofty cities, did great Ysgramor turn and let loose the fearsome war cry that echoed across all the oceans. The 500 who yet stood, joined in the ovation for the victory and the lament of their fallen peers. It was said to be heard on the distant and chilling green shores of Atmora, and the ancestors knew their time had come to cross the seas. As the reverberations echoed out and drowned into silence, all looked to Ysgramor, who bore the blessed Wuthrad, for his next commandment. With his lungs that bellowed forth the fury of humanity, he bade them to continue their march, that the devious mare might know the terror that they had brought on themselves with their trickery. "Go forth," he roared, "into the belly of this new land. Drive the wretched from their palaces of idleness, oblige them to squalor and toil, that they would see their betrayals as the all sin against our kind. Give no quarter, show no kindness, for they would not give nor show you the same." Our great forebear gave this order, as he did not yet understand the prophecy of the twin snakes, that he would be fated to die before seeing the true destiny of his line. Hearing this, the circle of captains gathered each their crews unto themselves. From here, they decreed, we will go forth. Let each ship's band make its own way, seeking their fates to the open sun. A night spent in feasting, the oath of the companions was sworn anew, and each of the 500, so they still named their count in honor of the shields that were broken at Sarthal, swearing to act as shield brother and shield sister to any of the Atmoran line were their fates to ever again entwine. As the red hands of dawn stretched from the east, so broke the 500 companions of Ysgramor, setting about their journeys, sailing now across the land with waves of stone and crests of trees flowing under their footed hulls. The first to break from the grounded fleet was the crew of the Jorrvaskr, who had been formed of Ysgramor's closest friends. Their captain was known as Yeek of the River, so called by the Harbinger himself from their youths past in glory. When assembling their glistening hull, he sought out the labors of Menro and Manwe, who now bore the native timbers across this new land of Tamriel. Among their fiercest were Tisnal, who was twice named, and Ter, his twin and shield brother whose girth was never spoken of to his face. There were others too in their band, Mexim the Walker, Brunel, who fought with his offhand, and Just the Smiler. These and others were sworn to Yeek, and they pushed forth into the shadows where yet the sun had not reached. Southwards they went, by beast and by foot. Elves they found, though none remained to tell what those battles entailed. The numbers of the Jorrvaskr never faltered, so shrewd were they in battle, with minds as sharp as their blades. Once, as the sun beat from its high home, Yonder the Tiny, the one who ran ahead, came over the hill to tell what was seen. Amidst a vast plain, his eyes had met a monument of a bird, whose eyes and beak were opened in flame. When his brothers and sisters crested the hill, they too saw its glory, but they were afraid, for no elven settlement could be seen to the horizon. "But this is not seemly," said Clúe, who went by Lot when hiding his face. "Is not this wide land fit for harvest? Why have not the elves, vile to their core, seen to exploit and tame it?" They asked of their elven captives, for they had many, what they found unfit about these plains. Yet even the captives who still bore their tongues could say nothing of the valley. They looked with fear at the winged colossus, and from their babblings did the warriors of Jorrvaskr learn that it was older than even the elves themselves. Of those who wrought it solid from its mother stone nothing could be said, but it was known to drive a magic almost as old as Nirn itself, some remnant of the gods' efforts to render a paradise in Mundus before the shattering of Lorkhan. This first of many, this crew of the Jorrvaskr, heathens and ancestors to us all, feared no stories or gods. Indeed, if there was something the elves feared, they would have it for their own. Thus began the labors once more of Menro and Manwe, whose eager hands again laid to the Atmoran wood which had borne them across the sea, and what was their ship became their shelter, as this valley became their purview until the end of all their days. Thus began the building of the great city, circled by the running of the White River as brought forth by these beloved of Ysgramor, yet but 22 of the glorious 500 companions. Songs of the Return, Volume 19, The Second Tale of the Ylgrammet. When that final battle at the barren pass was completed, and the melting snow carried elf blood back to the sea, the crew of the Kalkaz, the Sadon Wraith, and the most exalted crew of our Lord's ship, the Ylgrammet, at last parted ways, never to join shields again. They drew apart in that form which is not a loss, but a gain in knowing one's heart can be carried in the chests of others. So great was the love that those first of the 500 had for each other, and most especially for the great Ysgramor, harbinger of us all. They pressed eastwards, seeking the sea, when they came upon the barrow of Ingol, the mighty Ysgramor's son who had fallen to the whims of kine rather than the treachery of the elves. Our Lord had not expected to lay eyes upon it again so soon, and his grief flowed anew at the sight of it, as a reopened wound will bleed, as it did when first received. His eyes turned to the south, where a river met the sea, and decreed that there would he and the crew of the Ylgrammet create a great city, in monument to the glories of mankind, that from his palace he might always look upon the hill of his dear son's resting place, and feel that his line would know peace in this new home that was never known in Atmora. The elven captives were set to work bringing forth stone to build in their conqueror's fashion. As many elves died in the building of the city as had the crew of the Ylgrammet slain while on way to its site, and Ysgramor drove the wretches evermore to build higher, to lay a claim to the river, so that none might pass into the interior of this land without first showing due respect to its rightful claimant. Thus was the great bridge constructed, forever striding the river, that no elf might sneak through to avenge his devious cousins. As the bridge was built long, so too was the palace built high, spires reaching the sky to show dominion even over the very winds that had brought forth such a grief. In the deep hollows beneath the city, a great tomb was prepared for the day when Lord Ysgramor, harbinger of us all, would be called home to glory in Sovngarde. But as we know, he chose instead to be buried on the shore, facing towards Atmora, that though his heart lived and died in this new land, it would forever yearn for the beauties of still green Atmora before the freezing took it. Thus was founding of Windhelm, the city of kings, though her history is long and her glories did not end with her founder. Songs of the Return, Volume 24, The First Tale of the Krilat Lok. When the time came for breaking of camp, not all crews took southwards across the rolling lands. Some turned with quick eyes back to their ships, for their hearts were bounded to the waves as sure as they were bounded to each other as allied companions. One such crew was that of the Krilat Lok, sinewy long folk from the eastern edge of Atmora. Their ruddy skin matched the dawn, and it was often said that morning herself learned her glorious colors from the first faces to meet her at the break of day. The great kine lifted their souls in their winds, propelling them westward with the new lands of Tamriel ever beckoning to the south. In time these perpetual wanderers came upon sights fearsome and terrible, entire kingdoms of men beyond their recognition, skin charred like overcooked meat. Elves even more devious than the northern betrayers disgraced their horizons, until they learned the sheltered ways between. Great deserts the likes of which were never known in the homeland, peopled by beasts that spoke like men, with the savagery of elves. Many a notable and well-sung companion met his end at the spears of the legged snakes of the southern marsh. Among the brave crew of the Krilat Lok were of Roth and Bref the Elder, the great shield brothers, who often swapped spears, and their war wives Brit and Greif, the fair child, shield sisters in their own right who could bring the face of terror across the ice-chilled seas. Together these four stared into the abyss of trees that formed the foul-smelling homeland of the snake men, and as they were blessed Atmorans who feared no shore of Tamriel, they ventured forth to seek out their glories in the most dangerous of these new lands. Onward they flew, ravaging the swamplands, beating a trail between themselves and their ship, such that they would never lose sight of the shore. In the far-off day when at last Roth would fall, when Brit screamed her famed war cry so that all the marshes were emptied, this trail would fill once more with the treacherous snake men. So began the burning march of these great captains of us all. Songs of the Return, Volume 56, The Final Tale of the Cryon. The songs of the Return are eternal and numerous, for those first 500 those companions of Ysgramor, who cleared the way for mankind's rightful habitation, burned with a fire not seen since those days long past. Each ship carried a crew that performed legendary feats that could feed the pride of any nation for 1,000 years, and during this time of the broadening, scores of companions wandered the land, bringing the light of the proper gods to the heathen land of elves and beasts. They were but mortal, though and in time all would taste the glories of Sovngarde. It was in one of the uncounted years after the retaking of Saarthal that the crew of the Cryon was declaring their fortunes in the eastern lands near the Red Mountain. They were encamped, surrounded by bodies of murderous elves who had attempted to make them believe they held peace in their hearts. The shrewd Jorrvaskr was the Cryon's captain, though, and would show no quarter to the liars of the Southlands, as had been commanded by his lord Ysgramor, harbinger of us all. It was in this state of carousing that they were approached by a young and breathless messenger of their sister crew from the Kalkaz. The boy, Aesgir, as his name is now sung, had run unimaginable distance at breakneck speed from the blood-stained fields of the clouded sun to deliver the news to all who would hear. When he reached their camp, he bellowed a great sob before relieving his heart with the news that the mighty Ysgramor had breathed his last. Aesgir continued his swift run to inform the other crews as quickly as they could be found, for they were many now crawling the land, rendering our legacy from their deeds. And the camp of the Cryon descended into a mourning of the most forlorn sort. Among these fires sat the bravest men and fiercest women who had ever graced the dirt of this land, and they were brought low by such a notion. While we in the day shine know only Ysgramor's glory as it gleams through history, these companions knew his might with their own eyes, and such a loss hangs so heavily on the heart that mere words cannot express the altering of their world. For indeed the stories tell that Jorrvaskr, the most battle-hardened and unflinching of all captains, did collapse with grief, and never lifted again his mighty axe. And all around Tamriel, as the news spread as a dark cloud washes from horizon to horizon, did brilliant lights go out in silent honor of their fallen general and war leader. So ended the period of the return, and the original glories of the 500 companions of Ysgramor, harbinger of us all.